This is Julie Pearson, Little Thunder. Today is February 17th, 2020, and I'm interviewing Tailynn Tindall for the Oklahoma Women's Artist Project, sponsored by the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at Oklahoma State University. We're at Ty's house in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Ty, you earned your BA at Oral Roberts University, attended graduate school at the University of South Carolina. You're a self-taught artist, and your paintings incorporate a lot of movement and texture. I look forward to learning more about your life and your art. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Flushing, Queens, New York, a little bit a ways away from here. And I grew up in Queens as well. Yeah.
So what was it like growing up in Queens at that time?
Yeah. It was an interesting time. I mean, one of, my favorite parts of, being in Queens, like in the 80s as a kid, the graffiti, most people don't think of that, but you got to see so much like color on all the trains going by, just that vibrant energy. I mean, crime rates were a very real thing as well. Mm-hmm. And of course, over the years, they've tried to crack down on a lot of that. But for me, I kind of had an interesting experience being raised by my mom, but then also by my father's parents. They helped, and my mom's family, her sisters. So I was kind of, one of those kids that got all of the experience of the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, the older cousins, and my parents as well. So yeah, that was a fun time for me. A lot of attention. Yeah.
Maybe more than you wanted sometimes.
Yeah.
Great. So do you have any brothers or sisters, and where are you in the sequence?
So I'm the oldest. So my mom has a son, so I have a half brother. Mm-hmm. And then I also have 3 younger sisters from my dad and my stepmom. So yeah, they're all quite a bit younger than me. I was 12 when I had my first sibling. So yeah, only child for a long time.
What did your folks do for a living?
Yeah, so my father ultimately, he worked for the Port Authority, and then he wound up retiring as a sergeant from the New York, New Jersey Port Authority. And my mom, she worked for, it was kind of like a paper company in Manhattan for several years. So she kind of just moved up in the ranks through their management for years. And then my grandparents, on my dad's side, my grandparents that helped to raise me, my grandmother was a nurse. And my grandfather had his own business where he delivered furniture to sort of wealthy families out in Long Island. And so a few summers he would take me on his delivery truck with him. And I like to call that my first job. I was like riding on the truck and carrying the cushions in and, the light items in. But it was quite an adventure, those summers that I got to go with him. So, yeah.
Right.
And my mom's mom, she was a dietitian for several years. She's still living. And so she also kind of worked her way up in a nursing home in Forest Hills and worked there for several years until she retired. So,
what was the creative environment in your home like?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, the creativity was kind of my time. I think because a lot of the space was kind of an only child space, unless I was, with my mom's side of the family where I had 6 older cousins, just a lot of activity. But outside of that time, if it was just me and my mom or me and my grandparents, I was just kind of drawing on my own and just kind of sort of left to my own devices. Mm-hmm. I do remember my dad's mom, taking me to Manhattan to see, Broadway plays or to go see like the Tap Dance Kid or so there was that aspect. And I think my family just kind of encouraged anything that they saw on either side, they saw that I like to write as well. So they'd encourage me, to write my little poems or, draw pictures and celebrate whatever I brought home. But it was mostly, just kind of that time alone that I just kind of would draw and sketch. So, and that kind of stayed with me.
Did your mother ever bring any paper? Did you have exposure to different kinds of paper at all?
What type
when
of?
She worked for a paper company?
Yeah, it was just basic, 8.5 by 11. So actually she did bring some of that home. Yeah. But yeah, it wasn't really kind of the
fancy stuff.
Yeah. And my father, I remember he would write poems. I would hear about that from time to time. And so that, I think that always kind of stayed with me, well, I'm going to write some poems too, but it was not a whole lot, in terms of, hey, let's, sit down and draw. I remember asking my mother, I think I was in high school, hey, can I, do a mural in the living room, of our apartment? And she's like, no, absolutely not, But I would still kind of draw on the walls in my bedroom in the apartment in Flushing. And I remember doing a mountain range and just weird little, drawings because it was my space. So it was my own little gallery, I guess. Yeah.
Cool. What is your first memory of kind of seeing art, however you would define it then?
Yeah, I've thought about that quite a bit actually. And I need to double check with my father on this, but it seems like there was, for some reason, I think it was a summer because myself and my older cousins were out of school, but I think he took us, I want to say, to the Brooklyn Museum, somewhere in Brooklyn. That's where he was living at the time. And he took myself and a few of my cousins. And for some reason, I feel like we might have seen a Basquiat because I remember him, saying something about, this guy's done a lot, and it just, I remember color and energy, and it seemed fun. But again, there's just a bunch of us and we're hungry. But I do remember that. Also, just the trips that we got to take in junior high and high school out, to the museums in New York, where I didn't have a lot of time to just stand and engage. But I just remember just feeling good, just being there with the art. And it was usually the paintings. It was usually the abstraction that I just felt like, I like how this feels. Yeah.
Good. That was my next question, was if you had any experiences in elementary school, middle school, or high school with art that were kind of significant.
Yeah. That's a great question. So I remember, I think it was first grade. Again, I was kind of a, a loner, but I was also a student that the teachers liked, I think, because I was quiet and friendly, and, they're like, oh, she's great. But I think the teacher was just trying to encourage me, or something, but she held up a picture that I had painted, and it was just a basic stick figure, but, look at what Tailynn drew. And one of the boys said, why are the legs so far apart, and all the kids laughed, and it was, I remember it was like a skirt, triangle skirt, and for some reason, I need two legs, I put one over here, and then one way over here, but man, Julie, I remember that terror, it was whoa, and I remember feeling angry at the teacher, for why did she show that? Because these were my precious drawings that I would take home to my mom's mom, Nana, and Nana would hang them up, so it was kind of that's for Nana, it's not for showing. And so I remember that feeling. There was also a time, this was around fourth grade, my mom had moved into her own place, and so we were kind of in an apartment building in Queens. So I had my mom's friend She also had a daughter, so the two single moms, rah. But so the daughter, she was an amazing artist, and we were the same age. And I mean, she could sketch like, teddy bears, everything. I mean, it was amazing, right? So, and I would doodle. I wasn't, a sketcher, but I remember Simone was a little girl. Simone's mom. She was looking at Simone's picture that she drew, and I had drawn something, and I remember her mom said, you write really well, you should write more. It was kind of that thing like, this ain't good, not like Simone's, and that really stuck with me for years. And it wasn't until a class in high school where they just kind of let us take electives. I took, an art class, and I had this fun kind of hippie teacher. She just let us get in there, get in the paints and make stuff. And it felt so good and so free. There was no judgment. And I was able to kind of reconnect again, and I started sketching. I remember sketching my little brother, and sketching my favorite pair of sneakers. And it just came alive for me again. So a lot of that started to break off. So kind of moved back in that, journey of making and not just writing poetry.
Right.
So, yeah.
So when did you move to Oklahoma, and what was the reason for your move?
Yeah, I first came to Oklahoma to study an undergrad at ORU. So, prior to that, I'd never been. But my best friend, her parents had actually found ORU. They wanted her to go to a Christian college. I wanted to go to a Christian college, but I was just more looking closer to New York, like some of the smaller schools, but they were not accredited universities. So when they found Oral Robertson, they drove her out here from New York. So, of course, they said, why don't you come, for a college weekend? And, much to my parents' chagrin, me going that far away, but they let me go visit. And I just, honestly, I just fell in love with the serenity of just being in the flatland. It was a really peaceful time. Even I remember just driving up to the campus. We pulled in. It was something like 5 or 6 a.m. So it was very early. The city was very quiet, and it just, I loved that feeling. Coming from the city, into just like a serene space. But it also drew me because I did want to go to a Christian college. So yeah, thankfully I got in. And so that's when I came out, like in the late 90s, and I was there. And I moved away after I graduated. As you mentioned, I went to graduate school at University of South Carolina. And then I came back in 2005 when I was actually starting to work as a social worker. So I got a job doing substance abuse counseling. And when that opened up is when I relocated back to Tulsa.
I was just curious that at ORU you're studying English Lit, and you're not taking any art classes on the side. But are you expressing yourself visually at all during that time?
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember if there was one. There may have been one course during all those years, one art course. But I think a more memorable experience was I did have a work study job my first 2 years at ORU, and the very first year was the worst because I was like cleaning bathrooms. And so at one point they had assigned me where the art students were working. So, I'd go down there with my whole broom and and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what they get to do, like I just was like, man, I should have majored in art, But, it was really something that my mother, encouraged me, like, find something more practical, and I don't know how English was more practical, right? But just I think in her mindset, something that you can actually get a job. And so I just kind of veered away from even that thought of trying to do something, more creative. So the idea was I would, go and like teach English, in China or something like that. So I did have an interest in like missions work. And I got to do some of that while I was at ORU. And then doing that, it was great experiences, but I realized like I don't really want to do that full time, So that just kind of blew my whole plan out the water.
And how did you end up in South Carolina then?
Yeah, my dad's parents were both originally from South Carolina, and my grandmother was from a town called Rock Hill, South Carolina, so she kept very strong roots and connection there. So I spent my summers there growing up, and after college, I decided I wanted to be closer to where my grandparents were. So yeah, that was, it was kind of a no-brainer that I wanted to be closer to them. So yeah.
And culturally, of course, you've had now these 3 experiences. You've had New York City, Queens, you've had Oklahoma, and South Carolina. I'm wondering if there are 1 or 2 experiences there that you think might have impacted your art.
Yeah. I think definitely growing up in New York, I was allowed to experience a lot of different cultures, and my grandparents sent me to a small Christian school that was, interestingly enough, there were a lot of children of missionaries. So I had a lot of Korean friends, Indian friends. It was a real mix of students. Yeah. And to be, in like 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, and to be, trading out, Korean foods for my barbecue chicken. I mean, it was just the best. And it was, I think, really important for me to have that respect of other cultures, because I think that kind of built a foundation for me in terms of being a good social worker. And all of those experiences are part of, I feel like, the layers that go into my work. The layers and the process are so important to me in my, creative process. And I keep those things in mind. And a lot of what I'm considering as I'm preparing for a piece or a series, it's that internal dialogue. And sometimes it's my own, and it's sometimes what I'm, sort of exploring. If I were, this person in this situation, what is the internal dialogue and what are some of those universal themes? And I think that, it's a strength of mine because it's something that I've been able to do from years back. And not saying that all of the experiences were good, but, even, like I said, playing with one of my Indian friends back in New York, and I remember going to her house, and there were a couple of kids that were Greek. They were sisters, and they were her best friends on the block. And so it was my first time coming over, and she came back and she told me, and I mean, we were literally like, 3rd grade. We were really young, but she came back and she said, well, Olga and Rhea, they don't want to play with you. And I was like, oh, okay, why? And she's like, because you're brown, like that's, the language of kids, right? But you're brown. But, and my friend, she was Indian, South Indian. And I remember thinking like, oh, look, we're brown. And I think it was kind of like, she was like, but I'm tan, it was like, so you're already, having to navigate these sort of experiences. And so there is some of that insider, outsider experience that I think feeds into how and where I choose to display my work and where some of my roadblocks are, brushing up against places where I feel like I might be considered an outsider, and that hesitancy. But yeah, it definitely all kind of comes into play, I feel like.
For sure. And then there's an aspect of, I'm not sure what they were doing because you were studying sociology at grad school, but I know that social work, yeah. But I know that art, there's sometimes an intersection between the idea of using art and social work to explore things.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ran into that in grad school yet, or if that was part of your thinking and choosing.
Yeah. So it was interesting. Right after grad school was really when I got this concept that I could make space for art in my sort of adult life. I had one of my best friends from college. Her name is Shay Bearfield, and she and her husband had just moved to the Carolinas at the time, and she was actively pursuing her art. To where she had a show that was like in the Bahamas. And so the time that I would spend at their place a lot of times was just there in her studio while she was painting, and we'd be talking, and I was just kind of immersed in her creative process. And it made me realize I need to go get some paints and just have some fun again, because it was such an enjoyable time just watching her, do her series and, get her title cards ready and the whole thing. It was just like, oh, this is doable, it's not some mystical thing. So that during that time, right after grad school, I went and bought some paints, found the Michael's art supply store, and, got some sketchbooks and just started splashing paint again. And actually, I think my dad and my stepmom have one of those pieces, like one of those first, I found a scrap of wood, and just went crazy with it. And it's actually, I look at it still when I go back home to their place, I'm like, that's a pretty good piece, like
you were releasing all of this sort of creativity and emotion.
Yeah, so it was right after grad school. And I think the loss of my grandmother at that time, so it was obviously a time of grief, but it was a time of transition for me, just thinking about, okay, what do I want to do next with my life? And I was certain that art needed to be a part of that. Yeah.
So you come back to Oklahoma. Is it because you had a job offer already?
Yeah, I had the job offer to do substance abuse counseling. And I had always wanted to come back to Tulsa because I do like kind of the flow of the city, the pace of the city. For the most part, the people that I've encountered in the city are good people, and it's just like a good fit for my personality, So, I came back and got that job, and then just, started really rebuilding a support network, because a lot of my friends from ORU had moved away, to other parts of the country. So, it was just kind of that process of rebuilding again. But I think I needed that, after, like I said, the loss of my grandmother. She was, I want to say, probably my closest friend, if not one of my closest. So that was a significant loss. And so to be able to come to Tulsa as a place of healing for me, as a fresh start, it was a perfect fit for me, I think. Yeah.
So as you're rebuilding your relationships, or making friends and those kinds of things, and you're exploring the art scene a little bit too. So, and you're painting now because you've given yourself permission to do that. So what were your thoughts about the Tulsa art scene initially? It's really interesting. The group of friends that I had, it was kind of a young adults group at the church I was attending, and I thankfully had a group that was interested in art as well, not necessarily practicing artists, but they were into it as well. So it was, we would, go to some of the galleries in Tulsa, and occasionally you'd catch something good, but a lot of times what we would do is we'd drive out to Dallas. Or, we would drive. I remember them taking me to Kansas City to do an art crawl. And that was like my first time experiencing that.
And that was the time where, my friends started saying, like, Ty, your art is good. You can do this as well. You can have your art, coffee shop, gallery, like, you need to pursue this, and then that was kind of the seeds that started getting sown. I think the biggest thing, we did drive to Dallas, and that was my most recent experience with a Jackson Pollock, at sort of after, childhood, to where I consciously, was looking forward to seeing it in person. And it was, early years for me kind of becoming aware of the Tulsa art scene. But we drove to Dallas, and I stood in front of the piece that they had at the Dallas Museum of Art, and I just wanted to weep. I remember just feeling like there was so much energy that was in this piece, and I felt like there was a story and a story within a story within a story, and I was just like, I could probably stand here all day, and I'm really grateful for those times. And so there was that experience of, driving out to sort of larger cities and then coming back to Tulsa and, going, it'd be great if we had more here. And it has been so fun to see, over the past 10 years, how there have become, more galleries in AHA space. There's even more Black art, like with the current Gilcrease exhibit, like they are making efforts, to show more. And even for local artists, I feel like there's more opportunities. I wasn't pursuing a lot back then, like I said, other than maybe like coffee shops, and just kind of doing my own work here at home. But even now, being in the Black Moon Collective and, the opportunities that come across the collective, it feels like that's something that probably wasn't there, 5 years ago. So it's been really fun to see that progression over the last 10 years.
So basically, when you did first start exhibiting, it was a little bit in a coffee shop in town.
Yeah.
Did you have any idea how to price your work? And did you?
Yeah, I totally did.
Sell any pieces?
Yeah. I remember the very first, I don't think it's there anymore. It's down towards Bigsby. There's like a event center or something, but there was a coffee shop there, and I really had no clue how to price things. I didn't sell anything. The pieces were, they're beautiful, but they did sell, I want to say like maybe a year later at the Ida Red on Brookside. We had this really fun show where I had a bunch of pieces, and then I did some poetry readings, and I think people felt, the personal connection to the pieces. And so I wound up selling some pieces that, didn't sell at the first couple of coffee shops that I displayed.
That's very cool. So a poetry, it was probably your first time doing a poetry readings and selling work. Yeah,
and it's interesting, Julie, because a lot of that, that was, I want to say, a good 5 years maybe after my grandmother had passed. But a lot of those works had spoken to, the loss and moving on from loss and honoring my grandmother. And I feel like a lot of people connected with that. And then the show that I did at Ida Red, I called it No More Auction Block. I keep saying we because there was a little team called Five Branch, and so they're like, we're gonna represent artists. So I had a little team helping me, and it was great. But I called it No More Auction Block because I was exploring, just the impact of slavery and the mentality of being held back by those forces. And so the theme was sort of like, no, that's not going to happen anymore. You can't define my value and my worth, and sort of breaking out of that. And again, a lot of people connected with that theme as well. So it was just fun to see people connecting to the writing and then that translating over to the art. So, yeah.
That's very cool and very innovative, I think. So when do you feel like you got a chance to sort of explore more specifically like the Black art scene in Tulsa? When did those opportunities come up?
Yeah, I want to say probably within the last 4 years, a couple of friends and we would just start going to like spoken word events, and so it was just fun to see this energy.
That interconnection again between words and visual images.
Absolutely. And again, that just kind of piqued my interest that, I'm not alone, as a Black artist here in Oklahoma and specifically in Tulsa. But it really changed for me joining the collective, Black Moon. I'm so grateful for Beth and
it was already established.
Founders. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. When I found out about them, they I think were on the end of their first year, and they were starting to consider taking on new members. They weren't sure yet. But when they put out the call, I just jumped right on it because I really was missing community. Mm-hmm. My group of creative friends had, since moved on to other parts of the country. Mm-hmm. So, maintaining a connection, but it's long distance. It's not the same. But it really did make a difference that it was, Black artists, mm-hmm. That we can share that space together mm-hmm. and support each other. I don't feel like a competition vibe. I do feel supported in that space. I feel like it's a safe space. And I really, now coming on the tail end of being with them for a year, I think I'm really understanding like how important that is to me and my work. Mm-hmm. I feel stronger, having that support and being able to go to my friends in the collective and get feedback and get art critiques. And also, as we're sort of going out in the community and pursuing mm-hmm. opportunities, we go together, and it's way better than going alone, if I'm being honest. Because, there's strengths and weaknesses and we kind of support each other. And I just feel like, it's pretty powerful. And it definitely just kind of removes some of the sting of loneliness. Like mm-hmm. I do like working alone, but then there does come that undercurrent of loneliness, that being in a community of Black artists that, just kind of makes it disappear. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So are there organized shows at different times of the year? Do you trade off work responsibilities a little bit?
Yeah, they're still kind of figuring mm-hmm. out that process, just, being a young collective. But I know that they've done their anniversary shows, so okay. That's kind of a big thing. They participate in a program called Breakout, which comes to Tulsa and other major cities. But when they come to Tulsa, Black Moon participates in that initiative. And I know there's a few more that Beth will have to fill you in on. Okay. But yeah, what I found is that there's so many opportunities, especially that first year. It was a little bit overwhelming. Like, wow, okay, what do we do now? But she's amazing for kind of helping us stay on track and just pursue those interests that are in alignment with our mission, for building the community and then also sort of being innovative and pushing the boundaries. So I think what's important for us is getting to a place where we're not just pursuing platforms, but we are figuring out how to create a platform for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think as we're growing as a collective, that's I think that's a really important next step for us. And I'm excited about it. So.
Yeah, it does sound really great. So I love your artist statement that explains that you try to root your paintings in concepts that bring about positive change. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if you could talk about that a little more.
Sure. I'll just start with one of my favorites, which is the Hawk series that I started a few years ago. And I mostly do, work in pure abstraction. So there's usually not recognizable imagery, as I told you. But with the Hawk, there was just a year where I was just having this sort of internal search, and just asking questions about, am I living my life the way that I want to be living it? Are there goals that I want to be pursuing that I haven't been pursuing? And the hawk imagery kept coming back to me. So I said, okay, let me, take this into my creative process. And so as I started studying, that, hawks actually can symbolize insight, flight, wisdom, and that spoke to me. And so, I spent a good year or more, just working on some of those hawks with different textures and just like layering and figuring out. I was wanting to sort of create like this concept where the hawk was the atmosphere. I had one that I called hawk as doorway to alternate dimension, so that, yes, you're looking at it and you see a bird, but like there's more to this, and just all of that fun symbolism there.
Yeah.
So I really, I try to have a spiritual layer where I feel like it's an authentic part of that process, and not just try to stick something spiritual onto it. But that was a really fun series, and I do feel like people connected with that. I remember a gentleman purchased that hawk as a doorway to alternate dimension, and he said, I'm actually decorating my daughter's bedroom, and I just want this to be kind of something that watches over her, and that just meant so much to me, that he connected with that piece on that level. So just anytime that there can be that positive energy like that, that means a lot to me.
And you also mentioned in your statement that you like to convey messages about the dignity and worth of the individual, although oftentimes you're not representing like a specific individual per se on the canvas. Can you talk about that a little more?
Yeah. The show I did last summer at the Black Wall Street Gallery, I had a series. It was black and white, so it wasn't too complex with colors, but it was a splash series, and it was just called Black Wall Street Renaissance. And I really wanted to honor the work and the sacrifice of those individuals who built Black Wall Street, prior to, the massacre that occurred. But I really, wanted to take time, and I feel like I'm still unpacking and learning more with the research that I've done, but the sacrifice that it took to say, hey, there's an opportunity in Oklahoma. Let's see if we can make something happen here, because it wasn't like someone said, hey, we're giving you guys jobs, and so, when I created that splash piece, and it was just kind of an homage to sort of the dance that they had to go through navigating a world of racism and creating, to the best of their ability, a safe space, a city within a city. And so just that, those lines and marks, the energy, the fortitude that it took for them to do that. So that was kind of, one of the ways that I wanted to kind of incorporate and honor them.
Right. And you've sort of touched on this a little bit, because a lot of times you do try to focus on the positive in your art, but I'm wondering, how much time you spend exploring the darker side, and it may have to do with some of what you've talked about already, but.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind is, so for several years, for some reason I was drawn to Up From Slavery, the autobiography of Booker T. Washington. So I would try to revisit that. And I think spending time in South Carolina growing up, very close to, where my grandfather or my grandmother, her father was a sharecropper. And so, the one-room schoolhouse where she went to school. So I saw, firsthand some of the remnants of slavery and the post-slavery era, and that was really instilled in me. So, you know, that stayed with me through the years. So 2 years ago, I did a series on that book, on Up From Slavery, and I just wanted to explore, you know, what all it took, which of course I could never fully unpack that, but Booker T. Washington being born into slavery, and then he's a kid, and then they're like, you guys are free. Okay, what do we do with our lives? And so he has this idea, like, I want to learn how to read, and he has to figure it out, like, but I have to work, and he's like 9 years old. And then going from that to making a decision to travel to try to get to the college that they had there at Tuskegee, and how he, you know, talks about in the chapter how he slept under a sidewalk, and he could hear people, you know, walking over, and it's just very sobering for me, you know, being born in the time that I'm born and being an American. So, you know, education is freely given. So I just wanted to really take a sober look, you know, at what it means to sacrifice for something that you want, and the obstacles that you face. You know, obviously I hadn't had to face, you know, coming out of slavery or coming, you know, but then we do have some of that, the trauma, the remnants of the trauma that we have to overcome. And because that's there, I feel like it's still worth taking a look at. And I feel like for me, doing that, not just sort of academically reading a book, but for some reason doing that with color and with texture, and the energy of just that abstract work, with even the scraping, the pulling back, the putting back on, the sanding. Sometimes it feels like that's what the soul goes through in order to grow. And so it's sort of a sacred, sometimes a sacred part of my process, you know, to explore those types of themes.
That's really well put. So, how big a part of your work are commissions or?
Yeah, pretty small. I mean, there might be maybe 1 or 2 a year, not very many. I'll get some inquiries here or there, but mostly it'll just be like friends or family, you know, that, you know, say, well, I really like this piece, and then I feel this pressure, like, I don't want to mess this up, you know, and then are they going to tell me if they don't like it, you know, but yeah, not a whole lot in terms of, you know, just to appear someone that I don't know coming and saying, we want you to do this. Yeah, it's mostly things that I've sold are already done, and people see them at a show and they connect with them. And they go home to their, you know, new environment.
To a new
Yeah.
What's a project you're working on right now that you're especially excited about?
Well, I'm preparing for a show here actually next month, which is, or not, is this February? Yes, so March for Women's History Month. The time is flying. But yeah, myself and Tina Henley, she's also in the collective, we're doing a show together for Women's History Month. And so we're just exploring themes, you know, that have to do with the strength of a woman, and just deciding, you know, how we want to display that in our pieces. So I've kind of revisited Women Who Run with the Wolves, that book, and that book was really meaningful to me, I'd say about 5 or 6 years ago, and sort of just kind of reconnecting with my own, you know, feminine energy and feminine strength. And so I've kind of been, you know, revisiting that, and a little bit playing with some of the wolf imagery, and I haven't settled yet on how I want to incorporate that, you know, but I know there's this idea for this piece that I keep thinking, you know, women who run with the wolves, and then a piece that's like, and today I am the wolf, you know what I mean? So it's been fun exploring those themes, and getting ready for that show coming up here soon.
That sounds fun. So I'd like to talk a little more about your approach and process and techniques, just kind of for the lay person. What size paintings do you? It looks like you work in a range of sizes, really.
Yeah.
And they're on canvas.
Yeah. Can we?
So mostly painting in acrylics on canvas, but it looks like a range of sizes.
Yeah. I find that I'm drawn to squares. So typically 16 by 16, 20 by 20. And then moving up to 3 feet by 3 feet, and then 4 feet by 4 feet. So there's just been that interesting transition of like expanding in my mind,
Yes.
What I'm wanting to see. Obviously, there's like a control element, like, okay, this feels good right here. But there are, I find with some of the bigger splash pieces that are purely splash. I even had a friend tell me years ago, she's like, your pieces, they need to be large because you can really feel the impact of them. So sometimes with those 20 by 20s, when I feel that energy, you have to tone it back because it just gets too overwhelming on the smaller canvas.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been fun adjusting to that and so slowly getting more comfortable with a larger piece. So like, this behind me is a commission piece, and I really wanted to make it smaller.
Uh-huh.
But my friend said, I want like at least 3 feet by 4 feet, at least, and so I had to like push myself out of that boundary. And it's been fun to do it because I understand what my friend told me years ago, that you can feel more, when you stand in front of that piece, and sort of envelops you in a way. So I feel like I'm getting there, but I don't know if I'll ever completely let go of those smaller squares, because I feel like sometimes when you put all those together, they can tell a story, and so I kind of like that, sort of repeating theme of smaller pieces, and you can't do that with the larger ones.
Right. And you've talked about scraping and pushing and
Mm-hmm.
Etching, actually, and how they work with that internal, process. What kinds of tools do you use?
Yeah, I really like, of course, palette knives. I use, old like chopsticks, the ends of old paint brushes, just anything that will create a nice splash line. But yeah, particularly with a palette knife, and then there's a smaller rubber tool that works like a palette knife, but it's just because it has that rubber edge, I can play with it, and a little bit, it's not as sharp a line,
Right.
So I can do a little more blending, and it's a softer feel, but it still gives me that freedom that I like. So those are primarily what I use. And then I've used my sander here in the last couple of years for taking away layers that I've put on and exploring, what's coming through and kind of creating an understory there. So that's become a close friend of mine, the sander that someone suggested to me, and I thought, okay, and sure enough, it really has created a fun element in the pieces.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
How about the movements? How do you approach the movement in your painting?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts, particularly the splash pieces. I find that I prefer to take those outside to the backyard. If the weather doesn't permit, I do have to, block off the walls, the floors, not the ceilings, but
Right.
but if I'm outside, there's a little bit of a practice of what's the flow that I'm going for. So I find that I'm just sort of doing a nice little choreographed, activity. And then, of course, there's the element of surprise even with that. But, finding, horizontal or circular, I do tend to drift more towards circular motions. I feel like it creates a sense of wholeness, or I don't know, but I do enjoy sort of a circular motion more than straight. But then there will sometimes be a series of quick, short, straight lines, and those, and then cross-hatched again the other way. And so I have these fun little spaces to fill in with color, and that's always an enjoyable process because I'm sort of, seeing what's unfolding from there.
Right.
But yeah, I definitely, especially with the splash pieces, I do like to have that nice, long sense of movement there. And I'm learning not to mute it out too much, while still creating more layers in there, or if nothing else, sort of reintroduce it. Whereas when I first started, there was always this feeling like you have to get it right the first time, or it's garbage. And now, I'm learning, okay, if I plan this out a little bit, and if I'm willing to sort of go on a journey, I can reintroduce new movements that weren't there on the first try. But yeah, just a lot more of, I feel like, a graceful process now. So, and I think a respect too for what starts to unfold, and respecting and accepting that this piece is wanting to present in a certain way, so let's come to an agreement, let's reason together. So.
Right. All right. Had a brief interruption with the lawnmower, but we're gonna keep going.
Okay.
So titles. You do title your series, it sounds like.
Yeah, I do.
And then each individual piece within that will have a title as well? Or?
Yeah, I try to kind of tie in a theme. And I, try to be somewhat creative, but not, overly intense with the titles. But like I said, hawk as doorway to alternate dimension most times.
Right. And again, your symbolic vocabulary, you've talked about the hawk already, you've talked about the circle. Anything else that's kind of a recurrent symbol in your work that?
Let's see, recurrent symbol, probably the feather. I did have a series that I just literally called the Feather series, and that more so incorporating my own, spirituality coming from the Bible, from Psalm 91, just the promise of the protection that, those who believe in God are promised. And so I didn't want to have that. So I just had a series of feathers, and, it'd either be one feather or two feathers. But, people were really drawn to that. And I've had people that just were like, okay, these 5 are done, I'll take these 5, because it just speaks, to, I think, the desire for protection.
So they weren't necessarily the whole series, but it was like a good little chunk of the repeated image.
Yeah.
What kinds of research do you do? You sort of mentioned, sometimes what you're reading, for example, about Booker T. Washington, or do you keep a notebook as well? What kinds of?
Occasionally, I'll just either jot down a few notes. I do use my iPhone. I like to keep notes in there. Only because, sometimes you'll be searching online for definitions, and, so I like to screenshot information and keep a file there in my phone.
Okay.
And then, I think most of it actually is in my phone, because even with preparing for the Black Wall Street show, I remember going to the Tulsa Historical Society, and seeing some of the images and information there, and just being able to take notes in my phone and take that home with me. So I like to kind of just jot it down as it comes so that I can refer back to it. And then I also just keep like a small idea book, idea sketchbook that can go with me to work. that I can, just kind of sketch here or there, or jot down notes in my idea book. So.
And I was wondering how much sketching was a part of your preparatory work.
I'm slowly doing more, and having a respect for that. Because again, like I said before, it was just kind of like get in there, make it happen the first time. And that's a true artist, and now I'm like, no, actually, the more steps I put into this, sometimes I'm more pleased with the outcome. So, and that, again, being in the collective, and seeing how other members are going about their process. And I'm like, you know what, I should be sketching, and I'm sort of hashing out my ideas. I think a lot of it for me previously was actually mentally, where, people would say, well, how far are you on that piece? I'm like, well, I'm still, I'm contemplating, I'm in the contemplative stage, which there is a lot of weight to that for me, because I do have a big internal process, but I think it's helping me grow as I start to, okay, let's sketch it out, let's look at some color ideas and, let's introduce that step into the process, which, being self-taught, it's like, it's a new thing. Like, okay, thanks for sharing that with me. So, yeah.
And your signature, does it go on a painting typically? So your signature.
Yeah. So there was a point where when I first started, of course, I would, sign in the bottom right. And then I did some research, and there were some articles I came across where artists decided that they were signing them on the back because it was kind of throwing off the aesthetic of the piece. So here recently, most of the pieces have been signed on the back, and then the titles have also been written on the back of the piece instead of me signing it. Because some of the diptychs that, they are meant to be placed together. So it's like I don't want to sign two, you know what I mean? And so I've just started putting it on the back. But some that it just feels right. And if I can make it the signature to where it somewhat blends, but it, you can see it, but it's not sort of detracting from the piece. If I can pull that off, I love signing,
You'll
on
go
the
ahead
front.
and sign on the front.
Yeah, if I can.
So what is your creative process, beginning with how you get an idea?
That's a good question. A lot of just kind of thinking back through the years, a lot of it just will come from meditation. And it will come from themes that I'm drawn to, that I'm interested, or something that's just kind of been, in my wheelhouse for a while, like the Booker T. Washington series. And it will sort of feel like, okay, this is a good time to sort of explore this particular subject. But I mean, it is, like I mentioned, because it's just sort of my journey, even with Women's History Month, a lot of my friend that we're showing together for Women's History Month, Tina Henley, a lot of our conversations have been about, identity as a woman, identity as a Black woman. We are here in Oklahoma, where, and even in the U.S. historically, Black women, have not been celebrated and honored. And so, you have that resistance mentally when you're, out here as a single woman, which I'm not single currently, but, going through different phases of being single, and you find that there's this resistance from people because they want to sort of pigeonhole you as this or that. So this concept of identity and embracing that and walking in that strength, to me, feels like it's worth exploring and making a statement at a show to give people a chance to sort of explore these themes that either they're dealing with, or maybe because they are not Black, they don't understand, or maybe they've thought about it and want to kind of have a dialogue with a Black artist about it. So sometimes it just feels like themes that are worthy, that can help other people in their own process one way or the other. So yeah, they're just kind of, I feel like, come from that internal space. And then if it feels like it's the right timing, and I think the other big thing is if I really feel like I can do it justice, you know, with my style of work. Sometimes I've considered a theme, but it just didn't feel weighty enough the way that I wanted to go about kind of exploring that visually. And so I go, okay, maybe that's for someone else to look at. But yeah, I definitely want to be able to do it justice with, you know, the abstract nature that I work with.
So what is your creative routine? Like you have to work your job, but do you have set times when you...
Yeah, I have to, you know, and I've tried to get more focused, you know. I guess it depends on when there are deadlines, obviously I do. But it is oftentimes after work to, you know, try to get in an hour or two, especially daylight really helps because I do like to work outside in the yard and, you know, warmer weather. But after work and then weekends, prioritizing, which can get tricky because you want to have a social life. But really trying to make space for it, you know, and then like holidays, just where I have a pocket of time to create. The best, I feel like the most productive I have been is when I have set an actual schedule to say, you know, Thursdays and Friday evenings, I'm not doing anything, I'm in my studio. And so, you know, the intention is to get back to that spacing in a really a protected time, same way, you know, that we do with our jobs.
Right. So now that you're in this phase where you're really developing fast and taking your art very seriously, making that time for it, looking back, what has been an important fork in the road where you could have gone one way, but maybe you chose to go this other way?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I have a coach that I speak with probably once a month just to sort of hash out this journey. And so she's really helped me. This has probably been a good 4 to 5 years now. And so the end of the first year, I was at that point and I was thinking, I mean, yes, I love this art, you know, but I should just, you know, like do my own thing at home, and I don't want to like try to look at the business side of things. And I just, you know, and I was just kind of in that sort of existential crisis. And she really challenged me, you know, to get in touch with, okay, so Ty, remind me, and like, why are you doing this? You know, take some time to journal. Why did you even, you know, start these coaching sessions? Like, what did you want to get from it, you know? And I came to this, I think, a place of peace or feeling more settled within myself, that ultimately I felt like I have something to say in kind of the overall conversation of art, that I do have something to contribute. You know, it may not be the loudest, most important, you know, greatest, but I do have something to contribute to the conversation. And so I want to do my due diligence in my work and sort of growing, you know, sort of on the business side of things, and, you know, pursuing more opportunities in the community and beyond that, because perhaps my voice can help someone else. Perhaps my voice, my creative pursuits can encourage another artist, whether it be an artist of color or not, just to keep that creative fire going. That's ultimately what matters to me. And so I think when I reached that turning point, like, okay, no, I'm not just going to, like, you know, stay within my own little space here, but, you know, sort of be vulnerable, be willing to take those risks. I think that's sort of when that momentum started picking up. But, you know, ultimately that was because I made that decision.
So, what's been a high point of your career so far, your painting career, and what's been a low point?
That's good. I think a big high point. There's a couple. Getting accepted to the collective. I told Beth, when I got the email, it felt like when I, got my college acceptance letter, which it was just like, what? Oh man, that was such a joy, to say, okay, I'm in, and this is just going to be fun. And the other high point was having a show in a gallery at the Black Wall Street Gallery last summer. Because prior to that, I had shown in, like I said, coffee shops and those types of venues. So to have an actual show with another local artist who's a little more established, with Taylor Painter Wolf, I was just on cloud nine. And so even going through that process of bringing the pieces to the gallery, hanging them on the walls, figuring out placement, like going through that process, it felt like a dream come true. And then to have my friends and family come from out of town, and to see like, oh, Ty, you're doing it, it was just a really wonderful experience. And I'm just grateful I was able to be a part of that first series that they had at the Black Wall Street Gallery. So those were two big high points. Let's see, low points. I think those low points were, what I mentioned, those initial rejections in childhood, especially because they took so many years to overcome. And then I think to hear more recently, because, it's something that's so dear to me, whether, doing art, making, it's been such a close companion to me through the years. So anything surrounding my pursuit on any level, it's very dear. So sometimes I think unwittingly, people that are close to me that I know love me and support me. But, they might say, how was that thing, that art thing, or, just I had a coworker that I had invited to a show, and she said, well, I missed your little thing. I'm sorry, I missed your little thing. And so what happens is those subtle things that don't feel big, but, you have those moments where they'll sort of build up, and I'll just have kind of a glum day. I think those are part of that ebb and flow, and I'm learning. I think even just having a coach to help me keep perspective, I'm learning to say, yes, that happens, but I need to stay true to whatever that internal mission is to kind of overcome that. But I think, those low points, because they're subtle, but man, sometimes they can really hit you.
Right.
So that's been some of those highs and lows for me.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add before we take a look at your work?
I think we covered everything. Actually, I'm trying to think if there was anything else. I mean, you asked some really great questions. So thank you for having me be a part of this process. Thank you.
Oh, I'm enjoying it. So we'll pause for a minute and take a look at your work here. Okay, so Ty, we're looking at one of your pieces in progress now. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, this is a commissioned piece for a dear friend. And actually, she's originally from the Bahamas. And so I definitely wanted to incorporate the water. She loves the water. But also, she and her husband went through quite a significant journey the past few years. Where he had to have an organ transplant. And so the piece is called Bearfield, New Day Dawning. And so I just wanted to incorporate life, with some of the more intense colors, with the sun, the red, symbolizing the blood of, just like life that courses through us. And, as I continue with it, of course, want to go back over with another layer there, just to tone it back and kind of bring everything together. Just that sense of energy and freedom, because that's kind of what they represent to me. I mean, they're just such a fun couple. It was a challenge because she wanted it bigger and I really wanted it to be smaller, but she, wants something big for her living room space. So it's been a fun process for me exploring this particular style and technique with the sanding, the splashing, layering at a larger scale. So still a little bit more to go, but I like how it's turning out so far.
Me too. And it has a tropical feeling to it.
Thank you.
And how about this piece?
Yeah, this is part of the Congo Square series. I visited New Orleans, where my youngest sister lives, and we actually visited Congo Square, and just reading about the fact that that area was a part of town where slaves were allowed to gather for worship. And then it became a place where they could also sell and exchange goods. And so I just had a real, I felt like it was kind of a spiritual moment there. Again, just sort of celebrating, even when we're in the most difficult and challenging times, finding a place where, we can gather, we can dance, we can worship, and we can, just incorporate those things that help us move forward, despite of the obstacles. So it's been just a lot of fun using the splash techniques, using the layering and the texturing to sort of tell that story, in an abstract way. So that's Congo Square.
Right. All right, and another piece here.
Yeah, this piece is from a series called Cadence, which was based on a poem by a poet in Portland. Her name's Amy Orazio, and her poem was called Wait Here. But there's a line in the poem that talks about just the cadence of life, the time that we're born. And I'm always drawn to themes that have to do with just an organic way of existing in this world, even while we're sort of pushing towards goals, but also just sort of naturally allowing processes to unfold and respecting and honoring those processes. And then, of course, cadence speaks to the idea of dance. So what happened with this series, this is the fourth one, but what happened with the cadence series was it was a time where the techniques that I had been working on through the years, the drip, the splash pour, and then also using some sanding and scraping, this was the first time that I was incorporating all of it together, and then starting to learn what elements I want to pull back on, what elements I want to push forward with. And it's, I feel like people have been drawn to it. The colors have been really soothing and peaceful. And so this has been one of my favorite series to work on, actually.
And inspired by a poem by somebody else this time.
Yes.
Okay, and here we're looking at really just one of your splash pieces, straight up.
This is my favorite technique, the splash pour, in the tradition that Jackson Pollock made famous. So I always kind of enjoy, feeling like I'm having a painting session with him, but also just being out in the yard and, laying the canvas on the ground and working above the piece and just sort of, those sort of choreographed movements that I mentioned with my arm, and just those small decisions about, when do I want to sort of press and, get a splash, but when do I want a soft line? When do I want that line to just sort of dance around a little bit? And that's sort of the fun, those sort of unexpected outcomes, and happy accidents, you know, as Bob Ross says. So, but definitely very exciting for me because I feel like sometimes I just get a rush from the splash, you know, just releasing that paint onto the canvas. I definitely feel like I'm at play, have a sense of play when I'm doing the splash pour pieces.
That's cool. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Ty.
Thank you.